I'm Nicolle Wallace.
And I'm John Heilemann. And with all due respect to John Kasich, after tomorrow, your candidacy might require something a little more like this. Happy Game of Thrones belated spoiler alert day, sports fans. Tonight, the attacks get petty, the gender wars get ready, and here in studio, Wasserman Schultz, Debbie. But first, it's really funny, all eyes on Teddy. Tomorrow is the Indiana Republican primary, and let's just say that Team Cruz needs to win it as much as Jon Snow needs a fresh pair of pants. That's also funny. I love our scriptwriters. All right, today.
Are you crying?
I am
crying. Are you
okay
okay
really
here?
Funny lines. All right. Today, Ted Cruz unleashed an army of surrogates in Indiana. He did 3 events with Governor Mike Pence and his wife Heidi crisscrossed the state with Carly Fiorina, Glenn Beck, Congressman Louis Gohmert, and Senator Mike Lee. And there's no mystery as to why. In a new NBC News / Wall Street Journal / Marist poll of Indiana Republicans, Donald Trump leads the Hoosier State primary with 49%. With Ted Cruz at 34 and John Kasich at 13. The Texas senator also has a new ad, a TV ad in Indiana, calling Trump a liar and a phony. This morning, Cruz said that despite the odds, he can still be the Republican nominee, and he earned more free media by sparring with some rope-line hecklers holding Trump signs, first in Osceola and later in Marion, Indiana.
I am in for the distance. As long as we have a viable path to victory, I am competing to the end. And I'm running to be everyone's president. Those who vote for me, even those
we don't want you.
Well, you're entitled to your view, sir, and I will respect it. In fact, I will
do the math.
I will protect
you ask cases to drop out. It's your turn.
Well,
take your own words.
Now I'm curious, sir.
Time to drop out.
When Donald doesn't get to 1237, you're going to call him to
Donald's definitely going to get to 1237. No, he's going to get more than 1237.
Career politicians that build America.
You are the problem.
Let me ask
you are the problem, politician. You are the problem. Where's your Goldman Sachs jacket at? We know your wife works there.
Actually, I was supported by, and am supported by 1.3 million contributions all over the country. Our average contribution is $60. On immigration, you know Donald Trump had $1 million judgment against him for hiring illegal aliens. You know what he's doing right now in Florida? He brings in hundreds of foreign workers instead of hiring Americans. Sir, with all respect, Donald Trump is deceiving. He is playing you for a joke.
You'll find out tomorrow. So, Indiana don't want you.
Well, sir, you are entitled to have your rights, but I'll tell you. Sir, America is a better country
without you.
Thank you for those kind sentiments. Let me point out, I have treated you respectfully the entire time. And a question that everyone here should ask.
Are you Canadian?
All right, so Nicolle, Ted Cruz right now looks to everybody's eyes like he's going to lose in Indiana. What happens, just globally, what happens if that happens?
Well, I think the political fallout is relatively obvious, right? Donald Trump hasn't had a bad Tuesday since Wisconsin, and Donald Trump keeps rumbling on. But I have been inside a campaign in their final days, and I think that there are things that you know and things that you say. And I got the distinct impression watching Ted Cruz there, which was a sort of a bizarre interaction with someone on the rope line, but he did a couple of I thought rather strained interviews with Mike Pence, who gave the most half-hearted endorsement of the entire cycle.
Tried to fix that a little. Tried to fix it a little today.
Yeah, but when you clean up half-heartedness, it ends up looking like half of half-heartedness, which is like quarter-heartedness, which is just not good. But you know, it's hard to think of Ted Cruz as a human being in the same week when Boehner called him Lucifer, but campaigns in their final days, when you see the writing on the wall, and Cruz is a pretty savvy political analyst, I think are very difficult. I think he knows exactly what's going to happen after.
I think there's no question. I think both the Cruz campaign and the Kasich campaign understand what's going on. I would not be totally surprised to see if it's a shellacking tomorrow, if Trump wins by 15 points, as the NBC Marist Wall Street Journal poll suggests, or more. It's not outside their own possibility that Cruz will quit, I think. Not outside their own possibility. It becomes very hard. The math becomes very, very hard for Ted Cruz to stop Donald Trump from getting to 1237, let alone become the nominee. You know, Trump is on a real glide path if he wins all of Indiana's delegates tomorrow, which could happen. I don't know. He may go on, but the whole race on Wednesday will look different I mean, wildly different, because I think Trump will get some endorsements that people don't expect. The race will look very much like it's over if this happens the way it looks like it's going to happen.
And I think Cruz and Kasich will have an impossible argument to make if Trump looks like he's going to get to 1237. They were never going to win enough delegates to do that. I mean, they were always going to stop him, and it doesn't look like they're going to be successful.
Well, and, you know, you didn't have Trump being able to make the geographic argument. And this was the last stand for the never Trump.
This is the last region.
Well, he won in the Northeast and he won in the South, but we can stop him here in the Midwest. We'll put all our money here. We'll put all our effort here. It'll be like Wisconsin. Oh, we lost by 15. Never mind.
Never mind. So there are lots of cards you can play in politics. There's the race card, the electability card. There's that card at the end of the deck that tells you the rules. And of course, there's the woman card. That card has received a lot of attention in the past week, thanks mostly to Donald Trump stepping up his attacks on Hillary Clinton. Here's a very, very fast brief refresher to get you caught up.
Trump, Hillary, the woman card. Here's what happened. Trump sweeps Tuesday's primaries and says if Hillary Clinton were a man, she wouldn't get 5% of the vote. And he says the only thing that Hillary's got going for her is the woman's card. Hillary replies by saying that if fighting for women's health care, paid leave, and equal pay is playing the woman card,
then deal me in.
the next morning, Trump ups the ante. He says Hillary shouts, and he repeats that she wouldn't be doing as well if she were a dude. Trump adds it's not sexist, it's true.
What's wrong with being sexy? I mean, there's no
sexist. Everyone's talking about the woman card.
Woman card.
Woman card. Woman card.
On Friday, Hillary says she's used to dealing with men who get off the reservation. Today, Trump tweets that actually she's done poorly with such men, and he says Hillary's comment was very nasty. Also, FYI, now some Native Americans are upset.
Wow. So, John, the Clinton campaign says it's raised $2.4 million after Trump's woman card comment. What exactly is Donald Trump up to, in your view?
Well, it's interesting. You know, there is this sense that there are people in the Republican political intellectual world who believe...
Who have so much influence.
Yeah, well, you know, but who are explaining this as Trump is trying to do a jujitsu thing here. You know, Hillary's strength is as a woman. It's her historic first female nominee of the party. He'll turn her strength against her. I actually think it's not that strategic. It feels to me much more visceral than it does strategic. I don't know, but I'm interested in whether you think this is effective and whether it does anything to solve his woman problem that he clearly has.
Well, so to me, this is in the same vein as his crazy Megyn Kelly attacks. This was a personal reaction to a person that bugs him. Right. What I think is interesting is we're going to spend a lot of time talking about the women's vote. We'll look at huge crowds of women voters. Most of them are totally unavailable to any Republican, especially Donald Trump. So what he actually needs to improve upon is his standing among married women. And I think that he has to be very careful in saying that the only reason she's in this is because she's a woman. No woman in the workplace feels like their gender has given them a boost up. Most women feel like it's been, if anything, a hurdle. Pregnancy, maternity leave, all those things are difficult. So I think he has to be very careful.
Right. This is the point, right? She's going to win with women voters. As you say, most Democrats will win with women voters. But the question is, how does he keep that margin from being disastrous, right?
You can't win unless you shrink it.
And it seems to me with the notion of that there are security moms out there who want to be kept safe, who are worried about the world melting down. Those are available votes to him, but it still continues to strike me that he is not taking seriously this problem enough, because for a lot of those women who would like a strongman candidate, if they hear him what they think is being demeaning about gender, it is going to just shut them down to him completely.
I completely agree.
All right. As Trump closes in on 1,237 delegates, the rampant Veep stakesology swirling around him is all but unavoidable. And even if Trump might prefer, actually, to name himself as his own running mate, many Republicans are speculating over who that person might eventually be, especially as Trump tries to mend his relationships with party leaders. There was a New York Times story this weekend in which a few great mentioners offered a few great mentions. But the story also suggested a number of those potential candidates, John Kasich, Jeb Bush, Scott Walker, would in fact decline the position if offered. Nicolle, so let's put aside the mindless guessing game of who it's going to be or who it's not going to be.
And who would say yes and who would say no.
Right, none of which we have any idea about. What do you think, as a matter of political strategy, should be the criteria that Trump uses to select a running mate?
You know, I think he has been astute in filling in what he needs. And he has already said publicly that he would pick someone with some of the experience he doesn't have in government. I don't think there's any risk that he's going to tarnish his brand. He shoots from the hip plenty. If he had someone sort of more stable and steady by his side, I think that would be 100% asset for him. What I think the question will be is, you just talked about the security vote, the security mom vote, whether he looks to the military, to a former general, whether he, you know, I can't think of a sitting governor who's a woman who would be available to him and who would be a good running mate. But I think there are a lot of people who have served in the military who would shore up his most glaring vulnerability.
Right. First and foremost, you got to pick someone who the voters see and the media filter sees as ready to be president from day one.
Right.
That's the first thing. And the second thing is, I think although he does have an advantage over Clinton in some ways on strength, he does not in terms of qualifications to be commander-in-chief. So to me, that seems like that's the biggest problem, because if you could get that qualification shored up a little bit with his strength, you've got a very potent hand to play. But if you go some other direction, you could really fall down.
And when by saying that he gets all of his military information from the Sunday shows,
from the shows,
we know that he knows who they are. He watches them all. He could just, you know, tune in one Sunday and pick one.
Yeah, I mean, you know, like, I've been on the Sunday show.
You
should not be getting national security advice from us.
I'm with you.
All right.
So when we come back, the Democratic race in Indiana and Bernie Sanders' delegate sales pitch, after these words from our sponsors.
Welcome back. So much for Bernie Sanders' plan to shift time and resources to California. The Vermont senator was back in the Hoosier State today, holding 3 rallies as polls suggest that maybe, just maybe, he's starting to close the gap with Hillary Clinton in Indiana down the final stretch. That new NBC Wall Street Journal Marist poll now shows Sanders trailing Clinton by only 4 points, 50% to 46%, which is within the poll's margin of error. Meanwhile, Clinton has moved on to other states. Today, she's campaigning in Kentucky and West Virginia, which vote on May 10th. And tomorrow, while the Hoosiers are voting, she'll be in the general election battleground state of Ohio. So, Nicolle, I asked you before what would happen if Ted Cruz loses tomorrow in Indiana. What happens if Hillary Clinton loses in Indiana?
Well, I mean, I know we're going to get into this later, but because of the way the Democrats pick their nominee, because of the superdelegates, he's out of it. It's over. And if I could reach this table with my head, I would bang it on it because I don't understand why we
I could push your chair
talk about
closer.
him so much.
Right.
Actually, I did it last Tuesday and it hurt. But, you know, I mean, he is now mathematically eliminated. I've shared this with you before. One of the mysteries to me is why Democrats treat him so gently. I remember Hillary Clinton getting a lot more pressure in 2008 to get out of Obama's way. He's getting none such pressure. And, you know, maybe you can explain that to me.
Well, I think there's, first of all, I think that that it is the case that this did happen in 2008, right? Hillary Clinton kept fighting long after
and winning. She won Texas.
And she would win. And this is what happened. And not just Texas, but won late states. West Virginia with big margins. Indiana, you know, she fought on, even though the math made it impossible for her to be the Democratic nominee. He has a right to go on like that. I think the main reason he's handled with kid gloves is because of the fact that he's connected with a set of voters that she absolutely needs in a general election. Young voters, the future of the party. The one thing Sanders says that's unequivocally true is that young Democrats have been drawn to him much more than they've been drawn to her. She needs them eventually. The Democratic Party knows that they need them, and so no one wants to be too mean to Bernie Sanders for fear of turning off that subset of voters.
Well, I think the problem, though, for the Democrats is that Trump is now echoing and telegraphing all of Sanders' attacks on her, and that is not helpful.
Could be dangerous down the line.
Dangerous territory. So Bernie Sanders knows he's fighting an uphill battle for the Democratic nomination, but he's not letting that get in his way with his new sales pitch to superdelegates, who he says should back him in the case of a contested Democratic convention, regardless of who walks in there with more votes. Here's Sanders making that case today at a rally in Evanston, Indiana.
The point that we are going to make to the superdelegates, all of whom share that same understanding, is that poll after poll, virtually every single national poll, every single poll in a battleground state like Indiana, you know what those polls show? They show that by far Bernie Sanders is the strongest candidate to defeat Donald Trump.
So my mental image now is of Bernie and Jane and Melania and Donald sitting in the TV room, just flipping through the polls. Hey, check out this one. I mean, what gives?
Well, look, here's the thing. I don't know if Bernie Sanders believes a word of this, but it's insane if he does, for two reasons. One, superdelegates who are going to look at the end of this and have Hillary Clinton winning in the pledged delegates and winning the popular vote are not going to overturn the will of the Democratic electorate. They're just not going to do it. The second thing is that these polls are thoroughly bogus in every way. Hillary Clinton has been subjected to 30 years of attacks from Republicans. Bernie Sanders has not been subjected to 30 years of attacks from Republicans, and so of course
because we know he isn't going to win.
Right, and so of course he does better in these hypothetical general election polls, which are pretty dubious to begin with, but especially when you think about the information asymmetry between what voters know about Sanders versus what they know about Hillary Clinton.
Right.
Do you find any of this persuasive?
No, but listen, I'm not a Democrat.
If you were a Democratic superdelegate, what would you say to Bernie Sanders making this argument?
I would say pound sand. It's locked up. You know, go get some young people to register to vote for her because they're not very reliable voters. I mean, like here's the serious point. Yeah. He could actually be helpful to her, but I think he's sort of paralyzed the whole system. I think the White House is being cautious not to offend his voters. They're very much the Obama voters, and I think he's sort of locked this whole thing up. As a Republican, you know, really, I shouldn't care, but just watching this, I can't help but feel there's a gender piece to him getting treated with a lot of, you know, tenderness and worried about his feelings when she was really harped on to get out.
Yeah, I don't fully disagree with that.
Wow.
I'll talk about it more later on. Up next, we go on the ground to Indiana to preview Trump's rally tonight. NBC's Katie Tur joins us from South Bend after this quick break. Rally, sons of Notre Dame, sing her glory and sound her fame. Joining us now from the home of the Fighting Irish is Katie Tur, who is covering Donald Trump's victory march for NBC News. Katie, I don't know why they made me do the Notre Dame fight song in that script, but I was happy to do it just because you're there. Ted Cruz doing a lot of stuff in that state today. Donald Trump doing a little bit less. The Cruz campaign, the Trump campaign is watching the Cruz campaign, I'm sure, pretty carefully. What do they think right now, what they are seeing from Ted Cruz in this last 24 hours before the vote starts in Indiana?
They believe it's an act of desperation, everything that he's doing. Going up to a Trump supporter today and arguing with them is evidence of that, according to the campaign. You heard Donald Trump on the stage just a few minutes ago in Carmel, Indiana, talking about that confrontation and thanking that guy, even asking if that man was in his crowd at that rally. So the campaign feels extraordinarily confident about Indiana. They felt confident last week. They feel even more confident now that they are up 15 points in NBC News Marist poll that was just out on yesterday, and they are already starting to look ahead towards the general election. They say that they're going to be running a general election campaign from now, essentially, regardless of whether or not Ted Cruz or John Kasich are still in this race. And you're seeing that, John, you're seeing that because Donald Trump is already trying to woo in some Bernie Sanders supporters. He's talking about how the system has also been unfair to Sanders, trying to say that they're both outsiders. Not clear how much support he'll get from the Bernie Sanders camp. There's anecdotal evidence that there's crossover. I've certainly talked to a few supporters out there who seem to like them both, but I don't think it's necessarily a widespread thing. You're also seeing him attack Hillary Clinton even more than he already has. Today he had lunch with Ed Klein, the infamous anti-Clinton author, down in Indiana. So regardless of whether or not they win in Indiana, and they believe they're going to do it, they are starting to formulate their general election campaign. They're even starting to talk about vice presidential picks potentially. They hadn't done that until now, but they're telling me that this week is the week that Donald Trump is going to sit down and try and see who is out there and who would be the best fit for his campaign.
Katie, it's Nicolle, and I am wondering if Trump feels any satisfaction from the fruits of his meeting with Governor Pence. Pence went ahead and endorsed Cruz, but it was so half-hearted that I think Trump ended up getting the better end of it. And I wonder if he thinks this is sort of a model, if he wants to go into these states and try to meet with establishment figures to either get their endorsement or even just if he sees the benefit of working with the GOP establishment in the outcome in Indiana.
I was so happy to hear your voice, Nicolle. I don't know if you saw my giant smile when I heard it.
We have to stop meeting like this.
No, but as to what you were saying, I think they're seeing this, the Pence, even though he endorsed Ted Cruz, they're still seeing it as a win because in his endorsement, he did first speak about Donald Trump, and he spoke very glowingly about Donald Trump. I think that's partially because Pence is facing his own reelection, and he's realizing that this state is going more towards Donald Trump than Ted Cruz, so he's trying to walk the line there by satiating his more evangelical, more conservative supporters, and then potentially the rest of the state. I think they would see that as a model for success going forward. They haven't necessarily needed endorsements this entire campaign, though, Nicolle. They haven't really gone after them with as much fervor as maybe some of the others. Initially, they weren't expecting many endorsements, but I think now that he's won so much, now that momentum is on his side, now that it seems much more like an inevitability, they believe, and many outsiders, observers believe, that the dominoes are going to start falling in Trump's direction, that they're going to get more endorsements, bigger name endorsements. Boehner saying that he would vote for him was certainly something that they're happy to hear, as well as Senator Bob Corker coming out and saying that he may endorse. That was taken by the campaign and taken by a lot to sound like he potentially could endorse Donald Trump. But going forward, I think they'd like to have more endorsements, but I don't think they necessarily need them. I think the popular pop culture endorsements have served them better in a lot of ways. Look at Indiana. You have Gene Cady of Purdue. You have Lou Holtz of Notre Dame. And then you have Bobby Knight. Those three sports legends here have served him better than the governor has.
Katie, you mentioned endorsements, and I know that the campaign has spent some time trying to line up big endorsements for after Tuesday. Wednesday, I think, is going to be a very big day in Trump world. Do you have a sense of how they're orchestrating that day and the rest of this week on the premise that they're going to win Tuesday night, what they think the rest of that week is going to be for them to send the signal loud and clear, as strong as possible to everyone, that the race is over and it's time to rally around Donald Trump?
I think you have a little better information than I do, John. I don't know who exactly they're going to be bringing out come Wednesday, but I know that if past is precedent, we can see that they've often touted a very big announcement and then come out with it later in the day so that the news cycle, they can dominate the entire news cycle during the day and then dominate the next day's news cycle. But in terms of who those endorsements will be, I think you have maybe a slightly better inside track than I do at the moment.
I think it's going to be a pretty big week. Nicolle, you got a quick one for Katie?
Katie, what's the plan for tomorrow night? Is he going to go West Wing presidential style like he has been recently with flags behind him? Is he going to mix it up? What's the plan for tomorrow's, what we expect to be victory
I think
speech?
it's whatever he feels like. Tomorrow is going to be a big night for him, and if he's feeling confident, then I think you're going to see the usual Donald Trump, which is the anti-establishment Donald Trump, who will come out and attack Hillary Clinton. But if he does win by a big margin against Ted Cruz, we have seen him be gracious in his winning speeches, especially this one. This could be the nail in the coffin for Ted Cruz. So if it is, I think Donald Trump will come out and congratulate Cruz on a campaign well done, much as we saw him do with Marco Rubio in Florida.
All right, Katie, you're resplendent in purple in South Bend, Indiana. Say hello to those fighting Irish for us, Katie. Up next, can Ted Cruz sink a buzzer beater in the Hoosier State? We're going to find out right after this. Let the record show that our next guest is Ted Cruz. He's the Ted Cruz campaign's director of delegate operations and the former attorney general from Virginia, Ken Cuccinelli. He's going to be joining us from Washington, D.C. in 1 second. Nicolle, if you're Ken Cuccinelli, if you're the guy who's the director of delegate operations, has been running. It's been
one of the most successful aspects of the campaign.
How much are you looking at what's about to happen conceivably tomorrow in Indiana, thinking all of this work that we just put in, going around wrangling all these delegates for the second ballot, all of it could just be blown away in the Trump hurricane?
I mean, I'm pretty sure this isn't what he's going to say, but it's pretty crushing. I mean, the reality is once you've worked on these campaigns, and this has arguably been one of the most successful aspects of the campaign. Unfortunately for the Cruz effort, it became part of the Trump message, right? When they found out that Cruz was doing so well at winning these delegates and setting themselves up for victory on the second ballot, Trump turned it into part of his message about a rigged system.
Right. It's funny that in this, usually, the ideal politician, when you're running for office, you have a great outside game and a great inside game.
Right.
You want,
Obama, Bush.
Bush, right? They're both, right? In this cycle, almost uniquely I think, in fact, uniquely in my professional experience, is a cycle in which the inside game is actually a liability in some ways, rather than, because you can't have a good inside game without in some way compromising your outside game.
Absolutely.
Now, Cruz has other problems, but that is a huge issue.
He ran a near perfect campaign, and I think the campaign really can look, if they are not successful tomorrow, they can say that they did everything in their power. And it's sort of like the Wizard of Oz, right? Like one candidate represented like the heart, another one the brain. And, and if you're going with that analogy, I would give Cruz the brain and Trump the heart.
I think one of the things that's been powerful about Cruz, about Trump's argument in this respect, is that we all have now acknowledged, right, the system actually is rigged. It's actually, and a rigged system doesn't necessarily mean there's something wrong. In a weird way, you can say it's rigged without saying something bad about it.
It's not corrupt.
The rules are all laid out for all to see. But the truth is, both the Democratic system and the Republican system have been weighted historically towards allowing the establishment to control the system and putting their thumbs on the scales in various ways. So here's the question, as someone who's been a Republican her whole life, do you think that that system can survive, no matter who wins, no matter who the nominee is, no matter who wins this year? Is that a way of nominating Republicans that can survive after Trump in 2020 and 2024?
My instinct would be to say that Trump sort of burns all the boats, but I think that once you win, you don't have as many problems with the system, right? So if Trump prevails, it's harder for him to say, now we change everything. So I think that the people that end up having grievances with the system usually aren't in a position to change it, and the people who sort of thrive despite a rigged system usually don't have the appetite to go through the work to change it.
Yeah, it seems to me an interesting thing. I mean, if Trump becomes the Republican nominee and then wins the general election, then Trump will obviously have control over the system in the next cycle. If Trump were to win and to lose, it would be an interesting question to me. Who will then be ascendant? Will the forces of populism now kind of that have been unleashed by Trump, will they be the dominant forces going forward in 2020 and therefore insist that this system be changed in some profound way? Or will the establishmentarians regain the whip hand and sort of say, Trump had his fun, we unleashed these forces of populism, look what it got us, a big general election loss, and then the Republican establishment can retake control and thereby keep the system basically intact despite all the criticism that it's received in this cycle? I don't know the answer.
I think the Republican establishment is dead, dead, dead. I don't think it can be revived. And I think that what the Trump movement will birth, if you will, is sort of a new Republican Party that's more rooted in our base, that's more rooted in not the grassroots. When you talk about Republican grassroots, you're usually talking about a bucket of social conservative issues. You're talking about the NRA lobby. You're talking about the culture of life, folks. I think that the Republican base will be expanded to include economic populists, and I think that is a good outcome of Trump's candidacy so far.
So let's bring in Ken Cuccinelli, who's with us now. Ken, how are you? Good to see you. We were just talking about your job here while we were waiting for you to get mic'd up. So the part of your campaign, of the Cruz campaign, that has been admired certainly by political professionals, is the part that you've been working on, right? And yet it does not at this moment seem like it's going to be enough to stop the kind of gale force of Donald Trump. How are you feeling about how things are setting up for you guys at this moment?
Well, we are a grassroots-based campaign, and that works on two sides. One, the elections and caucuses that take place, and also the convention process that I work a lot in is built on the backs of people who believe in Ted's vision for more freedom from government. I heard the comment about economic populism. Part of that is crushing the regulatory state and the regulatory apparatus as best we can. Ted has laid out a plan to do that. People get excited about that, as well as a plan for economic growth and securing the country. It's those issues that conservative activism is built on and that our grassroots success has been built on, and that's Ted's vision. Can you help explain where this sort of gulf is between all of his sort of hand-to-hand combat that he does with voters, where he wins them? I mean, winning delegates and getting them to agree to vote for you on a second ballot is really hard, and making that sale has a lot to do with personal charisma and character. Yet
you know, Boehner calling him Lucifer. I mean, you know, the public persona in sort of a volume business is terrible. The one-on-one ability to connect is unrivaled. Can you explain the difference?
Well, you know, it's interesting. I was at the Virginia convention Saturday for 10 hours, and in my 3 minutes of remarks for Senator Cruz, I actually focused on what Boehner said, and I commented, have you ever seen John Boehner have this kind of passion fighting Barack Obama? And Cruz and Trump people resoundingly, no, it was thunderous. Have you ever seen him have this kind of passion protecting our border? No, thunderous. And it was Cruz and Trump people. There is a very universal just loathing for current Washington leadership of both parties, and Ted has fought it day in and day out, for as he said he would when he ran for the Senate.
I mean, let me just challenge you on that, though, because it's not just that people disagree with him at a policy level. They dislike him personally, and that is different. And the grassroots are not immune to lack of any sort of charisma. So why do they see it and nobody does when they're just watching him on TV? What is the thing that the TV camera doesn't pick up, or that people in the Senate don't pick up?
Well,
what are we missing?
Certainly, I think a lot of the people in the Senate and in the House, they are part of the problem. I mean, the majority of members of the Republican Senate and the Republican House caucuses are part of the problem. They're not part of the solution. And Ted Cruz has challenged those people day in and day out. And they don't like being challenged. And they don't like having a measuring stick held up to them that suggests, in fact, they're not the conservatives that they say they are when they go back to their home districts. And so they are very slow to embrace a Ted Cruz, because he has been part of the problem in their political world for a long time. They count on being able, I call it the mushroom treatment, to keep their people in the dark and feed them crap. And Ted Cruz doesn't let them do that. He doesn't let them do that. And a lot of people appreciate it. It is a big part of the base of Ted's support. The irony that I think you should zero in on is that so many people who wanted Ted to go and fight and appreciate him doing it then are some of the people who say, well, but you know, not everybody likes him. Well, that's true, but if the John Boehners of the world are the ones who don't like him, that should be a sign that he's doing something right.
Ken, you don't dispute the fact that Ted Cruz has gone all in on Indiana, right? Indiana really matters. This is an important election tomorrow.
Well, it's the only state up tomorrow. We certainly have put more resources there than any other state right now. But I mean, we have people in Nebraska, we have people in California. We are campaigning in other states at the same time.
So Ken, if Ted Cruz loses tomorrow decisively to Donald Trump in Indiana, what's the argument? And we only have about 30 seconds for this, but what's the argument for going forward for Ted Cruz if he loses again by the margins that the polls suggest today that he will?
Well, look, we have only had one state that was a must-win, and it was Texas, and he won resoundingly there. And until Donald Trump actually crosses 1237, this competition goes on, and it is a competition of ideas. And more than that, you talked about charisma. I mean, there are other elements that go into this, and people change their view of those as the days go on.
All right.
And we count on that some, and we continue to build at the grassroots level on Ted's vision. We'll try to bring it over the top in Indiana tomorrow, but whether we do or not, we're going to go on all the way to California and then to Cleveland.
All right, Ken Cuccinelli, as the millennials say, TTYL. Up next.
I don't even know what that means.
Neither do I. Talk to you later, right? Okay. Up next, we'll get the DL. I think that means the download or the down low, one or the other, from DNC chairwoman DWS, BRB.
I know that.
about a rigged system, it's also important to understand how the Democratic convention works. We have won, at this point, 45% of pledged delegates, but we have only earned 7% of super delegates. So in other words, the way the system works is you have establishment candidates who win virtually all of the super delegates. It makes it hard for insurgent candidacies like ours to win.
That was Bernie Sanders in Evansville, Indiana this morning, railing against the Democratic Party's nomination process. Joining us now to talk about this race and that process, DNC chairwoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz. Ms. Chairwoman, nice to see you.
Thank you.
Why is Bernie Sanders wrong?
I mean, Bernie Sanders is wrong because we have had these rules in place since 1984, and we have two types of delegates. We have the delegates that are pledged, that are elected by voters, or that represent voters based on the outcome, and then we have party leaders and other elected officials who have been in the trenches for a long time and who have a role, appropriately so, in choosing our party's nominee. And it's important to note that the unpledged delegates or super delegates have never played a role in actually selecting our party's nominee.
Can you just explain why he's wrong? I mean, I understand that the system. I understand the history of the system and why that the system exists and that he should be played by those rules. But
what do you mean
the critique?
Wrong?
Well, his critique of the system is that it's stacked. That it's stacked so that establishment politicians benefit and that so insurgent candidates are disadvantaged. Is that wrong on the substance?
Of course, because it's never occurred that our party's nominee has been selected by superdelegates. I mean, we have had a nominee.
So why do you have them? I mean, and we'll take them if you decide to get rid of them. I mean, we could use them.
I bet you could use them right
but why do you have them? Because it seems like you give him an excuse for staying in. He's clearly doing her harm. I've watched her interviews the whole cycle, and I thought, she does such a better job than poor Ryan's. You know, we have all this chaos. They have this. But now he is doing her harm. Trump's picking up these lines of attack. He's telegraphing them to a much larger audience. Why don't you guys, why can't you control his desire to stay in past the point where it's...
This election is going to be decided by voters who are going to vote because they care about who is the one that will ultimately have their back, help them reach the middle class. The general election will be decided that way. I'm not going to handicap how the primary plays out, but it is appropriate, and our Democratic National Committee members have decided it's appropriate for us to have elected officials and party leaders have a role at our convention, and the pledged delegates who are selected by voters. I mean, they are both important, and this is also important to note, which I've said repeatedly throughout this election cycle. If you didn't, it was decided a long time ago in part to have superdelegates because otherwise you would have, at the district level, when you have activists and other people who want to go to the convention and become a delegate, you'd end up, if the only way to become a delegate is for everyone to just run at the district level, then how is an activist going to compete against an elected official who's much better known, much better organized?
But in this scenario, he's there. But can you just play a little fantasy game with me? I'm an establishment Republican. These are grim days. If she loses, say, by just a smidge to Trump, is it fair to look back and say if Sanders hadn't done damage to her by questioning her ethics, questioning her honesty, and questioning her qualifications all spring, it might have turned out different?
No, because Hillary Clinton has earned 10 million votes. She has more than 1 million votes more than Donald Trump. Coming out of the last 5 or 7 of our primaries, our voters have consistently said they're enthusiastic about supporting either one of our candidates. 58% of the Pennsylvania Republicans coming out said they thought their party had actually been harmed by their process.
Trump wins, no fault to Bernie.
I don't think Donald Trump is going to win.
It's a fantasy game.
Right. Well, that's a nightmare, not a fantasy.
Well,
so I don't want to go there. And I think voters are going to make a decision based on who they think are going to move us forward and build on the progress that we've made.
Let me ask you about 2 other critiques of Sanders of the Democratic nominating process. The first is about same-day registration. Is there an argument?
By the way, can I also just point out that there is some irony in him criticizing a process that now he says he wants to use to become the party's nominee?
Right.
Just saying.
Yes. The irony alert. Is there an argument against same-day registration for Democratic primaries? What's the argument against that?
No, I support same-day registration. I support automatic registration. I support same-day registration. Any of those reforms, because we're the party that believes that we should maximize people's opportunity to vote, and Republicans believe we should shrink the electorate because they understand that the only way that they can win elections consistently is by having fewer people vote.
Let me get you to the second one, which is about open primaries versus closed primaries. Sanders now basically says, look, these closed primaries are a disaster. Democrats should have all open primaries because that's the way to reach out to independents who are crucial for the general election. How do you feel about open primaries versus closed primaries?
Well, those are decided. How a primary is structured is decided by state law.
Understood,
so
but how do you feel about open primaries versus closed primaries?
I absolutely believe that a party's nominee should be chosen by someone registered with that party. We should not have independents or Republicans playing games and
crossover appeal.
So just to be clear, you're against the open primaries that are currently in the system. You'd like to get rid of open primaries and have only closed Democratic primaries.
I believe that the party's nominees should be chosen. This is Debbie Wasserman Schultz's opinion, that the party's nominees should be chosen by members of that party. And frankly, I certainly wouldn't suggest that we start trying to change that in the states where it exists now, but we certainly shouldn't have any more than already exist. But again, ultimately, it's up to the states.
I want you to come back at some point. I want to talk about whether you think it's a problem that Bernie Sanders wasn't only a Democrat, wasn't even a Democrat for most of his career.
Sure, I'm happy to come back. And we decided affirmatively that he should run, and we welcomed him with open arms.
Okay, Debbie Wasserman Schultz, thank you for stopping by.
Sure.
Up next, the Golden State Prize, a big California primary preview with someone who knows what it takes to win in that state. And remember, if you're watching us in Washington, D.C., you can also listen to us on the radio at Bloomberg 99.1 FM. We'll be right back. On June the 7th, Californians will be among the final voters in this knockdown, drag-out nomination fight in both parties. Here to talk about how the Golden State works on the Democratic side is the former governor, Democratic governor of that state, Gray Davis, who's endorsed Hillary Clinton and joins us from the Milken Institute Global Conference in Los Angeles. Governor, let me ask you just for the moment to take off your pro-Hillary Clinton hat and put on your political analyst hat. The Sanders campaign says California is ripe for the Sanders revolution. How good a chance do you think Sanders has of winning your home state?
I think Bernie Sanders is going to run a very competitive race in California. I think it'll be close. I think Hillary will win in the mid-single digits, in part because of her years of service and the familiarity of Californians with the Clintons. The 4 best years in my lifetime were the final 4 years of Clinton's term, when we had record surpluses and 22 million new jobs. So I think she's the beneficiary of that, plus some admiration for her work as Secretary of State and a 2-term United States Senator.
It's been a long time since California's vote has mattered in a primary process. Would you look forward to the general election and say that it's going to have a difference? You know, that people register and they sort of go through the motion of voting and then they do it again. Do you think there'll be any difference in the November because of the primary mattered?
Well, yes, because I think, Nicolle, when people vote in the primary, they're likely to vote for that same person in the general if that person wins in the primary. So I think it's like giving someone $5, you're invested in them. So I'm looking for a big turnout on both sides. I think Trump is likely to win on the Republican side rather handily, and I think, as I said, Hillary wins in a narrow turnout. But I think it's really important to get people out and to understand how important this election is. I mean, the Supreme Court hangs in the balance, the Senate hangs in the balance, and obviously the president hangs in the balance. It's hard to say when that ever happened before.
Governor, it's interesting to me. I mean, I'm a native California myself, and obviously the state used to be a Republican state. Republican governors often got elected in California. It's been a long time since that happened. Governor Schwarzenegger obviously was kind of more of an independent than he was a straight down the line Republican. Why do you think it is that in today's California Republican Party, why does Donald Trump look so much like the favorite to everyone who looks at your state from afar?
Because he's speaking to a group of Americans that for whom the American dream is not working. I mean, I believe in my heart, and I always campaigned on John Kennedy's remark that a rising tide lifts all boats. And I used to say, my little dinghy doesn't have to go up as much as your yacht, but everyone has to feel they're experiencing upward mobility. And there's just a whole lot of Americans, frankly, on both sides of the political equation, that are not experiencing that. And I think that is the overriding reason why Trump is being successful. He says, I'm a businessman. I'm not taking contributions for anyone. I'm my own person, and I'm going to fight for the people who have been overlooked by the American political establishment.
Can you imagine a scenario where Trump puts California in play? You seem to have your political analyst hat on today.
I think it's very difficult, Nicolle. I mean, as you know, John certainly knows, 44% of this state is Hispanic. About 26% of the current vote is Hispanic. We have more immigrants than any other state. So he's offended a lot of people, and I'm sure the words he used in the primary are going to come back to haunt him in the general election. Not impossible, because he's very smart and he knows how to manipulate the media. But I just think the reservoir of goodwill that Californians have for Hillary, the recognition of public service, remembering how good the last 4 years of Bill Clinton's economy were, I think those are strong currents running in Hillary's favor.
All right, former Governor Gray Davis, it's great to have you on the show. We'll see you out there for the primary real soon, and we'll be right back here even sooner. Check out BloombergPolitics.com for all your 2016 campaign news, including previews of the Indiana primary tomorrow. Nicolle, thank you for coming in. Will you come back?
I made you cry. Of course I will.
You did not make me cry. I'm still thinking about Jon Snow's pants. All right. Up next on Bloomberg TV, Nolan Bushnell, the co-founder of Atari. Join us tomorrow for our Hoosier State Election Day coverage. Until then, I'm not going to cry anymore, but I will say, sayonara.
I'm Mark Crumpton. You're watching Bloomberg West. Let's start with a check of your first word news. U.S. Defense Secretary Ash Carter says NATO is considering rotational ground forces in the Baltic states and possibly Poland. Secretary Carter said the force of about 4,000 troops would be a deterrent to Russian aggression. That would be in addition to a separate armored brigade of about 4,200 troops the U.S. is deploying to Eastern Europe next year. Treasury Secretary Jack Lew warns Puerto Rico may need a U.S. government bailout if Congress doesn't act. He's calling on lawmakers to pass a bill to help the island prevent what he called a series of cascading defaults. Lew's comments came as Puerto Rico missed a deadline for a $422 million bond payment. The first U.S. cruise ship